Crimson stained the nursery floor. The words escaped Julian Croft in a choked whisper, shattering the sterile quiet of his penthouse suite at the peninsula. His body was rigid, his gaze fixed on the grainy, monochrome image flickering on his phone. It was a live feed from the hidden camera, a device he had installed weeks ago without a word to anyone. The connection had been lost for 7 excruciating minutes, and now that it was back, it revealed only carnage. Clara Jensen, the nanny, was sprawled motionless on the expensive Persian rug. A dark smear matted her sandy blonde hair at the temple, and a deeper stain was spreading across the front of her simple uniform. Her arms were curled in a protective arc over his 6-month-old twins, Olivia and Leo. Their small forms were nestled against her, still but for the faint visible rise and fall of their chests. Spilled bottles had rolled across the floor near an overturned bassinet, and blankets lay in a crumpled heap. A whimsical mobile of miniature planets twisted lazily in the air above them. He had placed the camera there 3 weeks prior, not from a specific distrust of Clara, but from a general distrust of humanity. Not since Evelyn. Not since the day she had vanished with a significant portion of his fortune and none of her maternal responsibilities. She had left the twins wailing in their cribs, accompanied by a note scrawled on her personal stationery that read, "This was never the life for me." That was half a year ago. In the months that followed, Julian had become a man encased in silence and security. He dismissed the entire household staff, installed biometric scanners on every door, and networked cameras into every conceivable space. He had held out until the gnawing paranoia whispered that even the most unassuming people harbored dangerous secrets. Clara had been a quiet arrival. 29 years old, with fair skin and a soft-spoken demeanor, she presented a resume that was barely 2 pages long, but was supported by handwritten letters of reference that spoke of her with reverence. She wore no perfume, carried no obvious emotional baggage, and projected an aura of unshakable calm with her steady voice and capable hands. In the weeks she had been there, she had fundamentally altered the atmosphere of his cold, modern mansion in Lake Forest. The twins, once colicky and withdrawn, began to coo and babble again. Laughter, faint but real, started to echo from the nursery. She folded laundry with an almost geometric precision and never left the twins unattended, not for a single moment. Julian had watched her on the feeds, observing how she could soothe Olivia with a gentle rock of one hand while feeding Leo his bottle with the other. He had seen her humming softly to herself as she cleaned up spilled formula at 3 in the morning, and later just before dawn, practicing what looked like self-defense forms in the cavernous living room. The camera feed blinked, a momentary disruption. The device was concealed within an ornate, silver-framed mirror that Evelyn had insisted on keeping, claiming it made the nursery feel less like a hospital room. Through the camera's lens, the mirror's angle caught the very edge of the doorway, offering a sliver of reflection from the hallway. In that reflection, a shape moved, faint, indistinct, but undeniably present. Someone else had been in that room. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. His thumb swiped across the screen, rewinding the footage by a few seconds. The feed stuttered, then paused. There, in the distorted reflection, was the silhouette of a man. He was tall, wearing something dark gray, his features a blur but his movements purposeful. Then he was gone. Julian's breath hitched. His eyes darted back to the main view of the nursery. It was still and silent again, the only sound the shallow, rhythmic breathing of his daughter. He leaned closer to the phone, pinching the screen to zoom in. There was something else near Clara's right hand. The sleeve of her uniform was torn, and her knuckles were scraped raw, as if she had struck something, or someone, with all her might. A few feet away, the shattered remains of a ceramic teddy bear lay scattered across the rug. It had been a nightlight, a soft, glowing sentinel. Its jagged pieces now glinted with a reddish tint. She had fought. She had tried to defend them, but it clearly hadn't been enough. Then, just beneath the edge of the crib, half hidden by the rug, Julian saw a glint of silver. His stomach plummeted. "It can't be," he breathed. He zoomed in further, the pixels resolving into a familiar shape. A silver locket, delicate and etched with a floral pattern. Evelyn's locket. The very one he had personally locked away in his office safe. A piece he hadn't laid eyes on in over a year. The one she had worn every single day until the morning she disappeared without a trace. Julian's pulse thundered in his ears, his throat constricting. He didn't waste another second. His fingers stabbed at the screen, dialing 911. 911, what is your emergency? There's been an intruder, Julian snapped, his voice a raw bark as he began to pace the suite. My children are in danger. There's blood. I'm sending you the live feed right now. It's at 1855 Sheridan Road, Lake Forest. Hurry! Just get someone there now! He didn't wait for a response. He snatched his wallet and keys from the nightstand and sprinted barefoot from the room, down the plush corridor of the peninsula, ignoring the beckoning call of the elevators. The stairwell felt like a descent into madness. His own reflection in the polished chrome of the elevator doors he'd bypassed had shown him a stranger, a pale, furious man he didn't recognize. A shadow in a mirror, a locket under a crib, and blood on the woman who had protected his children with more ferocity than their own mother ever had. He shoved his way through the revolving glass doors of the lobby and bolted across the circular driveway. His Bentley chirped, unlocking as he approached. The door swung open, and he threw himself behind the wheel, his hands trembling so violently he could barely fit the key into the ignition. It failed to catch once, then again. "Come on!" he roared, slamming his fist against the dashboard. The third attempt roared to life, the engine a thunderous promise of speed. Rain began to lash against the windshield as he tore out onto Michigan Avenue, heading north. Every red light, every second spent in traffic replayed that single frozen image in his mind. Clara, bloodied and collapsed, with his twins tucked safely beneath her arm. Julian's jaw was clenched so tight it ached. The image of the silver locket pulsed in his memory like a fresh wound. Evelyn. It was impossible. She had vanished 6 months ago, emptied their joint accounts, and severed every tie. She had walked away from her own children and had never once looked back. 2 miles from his exit on the expressway, he could see the distant flicker of emergency lights painting the horizon. It wasn't fast enough. He pressed the accelerator harder, his stomach churning as he finally veered onto the exit ramp. As he turned onto the long, winding driveway of his estate, he saw it. The main gate was ajar. It was never left ajar. Julian always closed it himself, a ritual of control. Motion-activated floodlights above the garage sputtered erratically, blinking like a distress signal. The gravel crunched loudly under his tires as he slammed on the brakes, leaping out of the car before it had even come to a complete stop. The massive front door was slightly open. The foyer light flickered. He didn't shout, not yet. He ran up the grand marble staircase, his shoes pounding a frantic rhythm, and down the long hallway toward the nursery. The door stood open, and there, exactly as he had seen in the footage, was Clara. A dark stain marred the hardwood floor around her. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. As he entered, her eyes fluttered open. The twins whimpered against her, their tiny fists tangled in the torn fabric of her uniform. Julian dropped to his knees beside her. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. Her lips parted, the words coming out as a strained whisper. "They're safe. I didn't let him take them." "Who was it?" he asked, though a cold certainty was already settling in his gut. I don't know his name," she murmured, her gaze unfocused. "But he said she sent him. He was looking for something in the safe. He took the key from your study." Julian closed his eyes, a wave of nausea washing over him. The camera in the study was still offline. He had tried so desperately to lock the world out, but the one person he had allowed to walk away had just found a way to break back in. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, closer. He turned toward the nursery window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "You saved them," he whispered, not turning back to her. "I just did what any mother would do," Clara said, and somewhere deep in Julian Croft's fractured heart, something that had been frozen for months finally began to crack. He didn't know what it was precisely. Some frozen part of him, perhaps. A corner of his soul that had been hardened by betrayal for far too long. But in that nursery, surrounded by the scent of blood, the sound of muffled baby cries, and the growing hum of sirens outside, he felt it snap like old, brittle glass under pressure. He reached out, his hand trembling as he brushed it across Olivia's back. Her tiny body pressed deeper into Clara's arm, as if seeking warmth and reassurance. Leo stirred as well, his lips parting in a sleepy whimper. "I've got you," Julian murmured, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Clara tried to lift her head but winced, letting it fall back to the floor. "They didn't cry much," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I think they knew I needed them to be quiet." Julian looked at her then, truly looked at her for the first time. Blood matted the sandy blonde curls along her temple. One sleeve of her simple blue uniform was ripped open, revealing a deep purpling bruise forming near her shoulder. Her lips were dry and chapped, but her eyes, those sharp, steady hazel eyes, still held a spark of defiance. "You fought him," he said softly. Her voice cracked. "He was strong, fast. I only got in a few hits before he knocked me down." Julian's jaw tightened. The self-defense training he'd seen on the camera, the bruised knuckles, the shattered teddy bear nightlight, it all clicked into place. "Your father," he said suddenly. "He taught you." She managed a single, pained nod. "Ex-military. He used to say, even if you can't win the fight, make sure the other guy never forgets it." Before Julian could respond, the front door burst open downstairs, and the heavy thud of boots echoed up the marble staircase. "Police! Clear the hallway!" a voice called out. Julian stood and raised a hand. "Up here, in the nursery!" Two uniformed officers entered, weapons drawn, their eyes sweeping the room before one of them holstered his pistol and knelt to check Clara's pulse. The other officer approached Julian. "Mr. Croft?" "Yes. We've got units clearing the perimeter. Paramedics are on standby." Julian nodded, gesturing toward Clara and the twins. "She protected them. Don't let her out of your sight." "Yes, sir." As a team of EMTs moved in with a stretcher, Julian stood off to the side, watching as they gently lifted Clara. Her eyes fluttered open again and found his across the room. "I didn't open the door," she whispered, her voice strained. He was already inside. Julian frowned. "Are you sure?" She nodded weakly. "I heard the twins stirring, and when I stepped into the hallway he was just there. I tried to block the nursery door, but he—" She trailed off, unable to finish. He understood what she couldn't say. He had bypassed the alarm system. He must have known the layout. The blind spots. The officer looked up from his notepad. Any idea who would have that kind of access, Mr. Croft? Julian didn't answer right away. The locket, the reflection in the mirror, the words Clara had relayed. She sent me. His mind replayed the moment he'd seen the intruder's silhouette. Evelyn's favorite locket had been left behind by a man who either didn't know its significance or didn't care that it would betray them both. He finally turned to the officer. I might. The paramedics secured Clara to the stretcher and began wheeling her out. She looked small and frail, her skin pale against the stark white of the sheets, her uniform torn and stained. Yet, she kept glancing back toward the twins until one of the officers gently reassured her. They're safe. We'll take care of them. Julian followed them in silence. As they reached the front door, the cold morning air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt and distant Lake Michigan. Police cars bathed the long driveway in flashing red and blue lights. One of the iron gates hung slightly off its hinge. The house he had transformed into a fortress now stood violated and powerless, and he had no one to blame but himself. He had trusted the wrong woman once, and in his bitterness, he had punished the entire world for it. He watched as Clara was loaded into the ambulance. The twins, swaddled in warm blankets, were passed into the careful arms of a female officer. Olivia whimpered softly. Leo reached out a tiny, jerky hand and clutched the corner of Julian's jacket. He blinked, momentarily stunned by the contact. They know your voice now, Clara had told him a week ago. He cleared his throat and reached out, letting Leo curl his small fingers around one of his. The baby didn't cry. A soft, unfamiliar ache bloomed in Julian's chest. He nodded to the officer and followed them to a waiting squad car. Inside the mansion, crime scene technicians were already at work, dusting for prints and inspecting the back garden. Julian stood on the porch, his arms crossed against the morning chill, and watched the emergency lights flicker against the dense canopy of trees. Detective Rossi, the officer from earlier, returned with her notepad. You said you might have an idea about the intruder? Julian hesitated. He thought of Evelyn, the last time he had seen her in person. The way she'd looked over her shoulder as she walked out of this very house. A cool, dismissive glance that had severed 6 years of marriage. This was never the life for me. He clenched his jaw. Not yet, he replied. But I think I know where you should start looking. The detective nodded, making a note. We'll need access to your security system. Any backups? Where's the main console? Julian pointed down the east hallway. In the study. But if he did what I think he did, you won't find anything useful there. The detective arched an eyebrow. Why's that? Because the bastard knew how to blind it. He turned and walked back into the house. The foyer was still littered with signs of the struggle, scuff marks on the floor, an overturned side table, a small piece of fabric from Clara's torn uniform. He paused at the large mirror near the staircase. It showed him everything, the man he had become, and perhaps the one he was still afraid to be. Julian touched the edge of the ornate frame, stared at his own reflection, and whispered to no one in particular. What did I let walk back into my life? Behind him, Olivia let out a sleepy cry. He turned, and for the first time in 6 long months, he walked not away from the sound, but toward it. Julian stood in the nursery doorway long after the flashing lights had faded from the windows, long after the last of the officers and EMTs had cleared the scene. The quiet that settled over the house felt heavier than before, as if the walls themselves were struggling to process the violence they had witnessed. The twins were asleep again, Olivia in her crib, Leo curled beside a warm bottle on a changing pad that had long since gone cold. The blood had been cleaned from the hardwood floor by a specialized team, but in his mind's eye, he could still see the stain. He saw Clara's body curled like a human shield around his children. He saw the torn sleeve, the bruised knuckles, the silver locket. He saw the look in her eyes. Not fear, but pure, unadulterated focus. The kind of look soldiers wore when they knew backup wasn't coming. He walked to the changing table and gently lifted Leo, placing him into the crib beside his sister. Their little chests rose and fell in a synchronized rhythm that reminded him of the gentle lapping of waves against the docks at Monroe Harbor. He carefully adjusted the blanket around them, then stepped back and shut the door without a sound. The study was dimly lit, but the insistent red blinking from the security panel was impossible to miss. It pulsed steadily, like a mechanical heartbeat. He tapped a few commands into the console. The result was exactly what he expected. Static, corrupted files, a few seconds of frozen footage from irrelevant cameras, and then black screens for the critical areas. He opened the top desk drawer where he kept the primary backup drive. It was empty. His breath slowed, becoming controlled and even. The contents of the drawer had been rifled through. The organizer tray was knocked askew, and a pen he never used lay on its side. Its tip snapped. He pulled the drawer all the way out and reached underneath. His fingers brushed against the familiar shape of electrical tape. Still there. The second, hidden backup key to the server room. He stepped into the narrow hallway, concealed behind a bookcase, and descended the spiral staircase to the lower level. The server room door required both a palm scan and a passcode. The system accepted both without protest. The low, constant hum of cooling fans and electronics greeted him. Julian walked to the main server tower and inserted the key. The status lights flickered, then blinked a steady green. He sat down at the terminal, cracked his knuckles, and began to type. For the next hour, he combed through raw data logs, residual video packets, and metadata. Every entry told the same story. The system had been overridden manually from inside the network. Someone had bypassed the firewall, killed the feeds to the nursery and study, and rerouted the automated backups to a dead-end partition. This wasn't the work of a common thief. It was the work of a professional. Julian leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. He knew perhaps 5 people in the world with the skill to execute such a precise digital intrusion. 4 of them worked for his company. The 5th was Evelyn, and she knew the digital and physical architecture of this house better than anyone. He closed the laptop and stared at the blinking lights of the server rack. The locket hadn't been a mistake. Neither had the timing. She had waited until he was out of town for a business trip. She knew precisely when Clara would be alone with the children. She knew what to have her accomplice take and what to have him leave behind. The locket wasn't just forgotten. It was a message, a signature. He returned upstairs just as the first rays of dawn broke through the kitchen windows, painting the marble countertops in pale gold. The faint clinical smell of antiseptic still lingered in the hallway. A single mug sat in the drying rack. It was Clara's favorite, a simple blue ceramic cup with the word "calm" etched on the side. He wrapped his hands around it instinctively. It was still slightly warm. She must have been using it just before the attack. His phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number. He hesitated for only a second before answering. "This is Croft." "Mr. Croft, this is Detective Isabella Rossi, with the Lake County Sheriff's Office. I'm leading the investigation into the break-in at your residence last night." "Boy!" Julian walked into the living room and stood by the massive fireplace, watching the early light creep across the floor. "Go ahead," he said. "We've already collected prints and material samples from the scene. Some glove fibers, partial shoe prints on the east side of the house near the garden. But more importantly, we've recovered a face. Julian turned from the window. From where? One of your older exterior cameras by the service gate. It wasn't connected to the rest of your digital network. It's an old analog system. He had completely forgotten about it. Evelyn had once insisted it be left operational, just in case. A relic of a previous security installation. We got a partial face, Detective Rossi continued. Male, late 30s, unshaven, wearing a gray windbreaker. Does that description mean anything to you? Julian's blood ran cold. She had one, he said, his voice flat. Pardon me? Evelyn. She used to wear a gray windbreaker. Always left it hanging by the back door. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Rossi said, We're running facial enhancement software and comparing the image against known associates. We'll be in touch as soon as we have something more solid. Thank you, Detective. He ended the call and stared into the cold, dark fireplace. A windbreaker. A camera he had forgotten existed. A woman who had vanished 6 months ago, yet had somehow found a way to claw her way back into his life. He returned to the nursery. The twins were still sleeping, bathed in the soft amber light of the rising sun. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree just outside the cracked window. The locket sat on the nightstand. He had picked it up from the floor before the officers had arrived to bag evidence. It was scratched and slightly dented, but it was unmistakably hers. He clutched it tightly in his fist, the cool metal pressing into his palm. His eyes went to the crib. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't about money. Not anymore. This was about legacy, territory, and control. Evelyn had left, but she still believed she had a claim. On the house, on him, and on the children. She had sent a thief, a hacker, and possibly worse. But she hadn't counted on Clara, and she damn sure hadn't counted on Julian finding the strength to fight back. He turned away from the crib and headed toward the kitchen. There were still a few hours before the world fully woke up, but for the first time in a very long time, he was already wide awake. The morning light had crept further into the mansion, casting long, soft shadows across the cold marble floors. It felt almost peaceful, though Julian knew that peace was an illusion. Beneath that silence lay the hum of a broken system, both digital and human. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, his fourth since sunrise, and stood by the window overlooking the garden where the intruder had slipped through the night before. The soil near the hedges was disturbed, and the damp grass bore the faint outline of a man's boots. He could almost picture it, the gray jacket brushing past the rose bushes, the quiet efficiency of a professional thief who knew where every blind spot was. Evelyn had chosen her operative well, or perhaps she hadn't chosen at all. Maybe she had been desperate. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth that even the strong coffee couldn't wash away. A soft cry echoed through the baby monitor on the counter. Olivia. Her voice was thin but insistent, a sound that used to feel like an unwelcome chore. Now, it made his heart quicken with a strange mix of anxiety and purpose. He set the mug down and climbed the stairs, his reflection following him in the mirrors that lined the hallway, the reflection of a man who was both furious and terrified. In the nursery, the twins were stirring. Clara's temporary cot, which she sometimes used on difficult nights, was gone. The paramedics had taken her to the hospital in Highland Park. Without her presence, the room felt wrong, too bright, too exposed. Julian leaned over the cribs. Leo opened one blue eye and blinked up at him, his tiny fist waving in the air as if demanding attention. "Yeah, I know," Julian murmured. "Me too, kid." He picked Leo up, his movements awkward. The boy squirmed but didn't cry. Julian looked around for a bottle, remembering Clara's precise system. Warming the milk to exactly body temperature, 7 ounces, no foam, no air bubbles. He found the container of formula, hesitated, then gave a soft, self-deprecating laugh. "Fine," he muttered. "You win." He managed to feed both babies, his actions clumsy but determined. When they had finally drifted back to sleep, he sat in the armchair by the window. Outside, officers were still walking the perimeter, their search for any missed clues methodical and slow. A knock at the nursery door startled him. "Mr. Croft?" Detective Rossi stepped in, her presence brisk but not unkind. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her dark hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her notepad was already open. "Detective," Julian greeted, standing. "Any progress?" "Some." She flipped a page. "We identified the intruder. His name is Mark Calloway. He has a history of cyber theft, mostly targeting high-net-worth clients. We have reason to believe your ex-wife was in contact with him." Julian didn't react outwardly, but his pulse jumped. "How recent?" "3 days ago," Rossi said. "Text messages. He referred to your house as the Vault. She gave him access points, security schedules. Maybe more. We're still confirming." Julian turned toward the window again, his hand gripping the back of the armchair. "She knows this place better than I do. Every code, every angle. I rebuilt the system after she left, but some habits die hard." Rossi studied him for a moment. "Do you still love her?" He almost laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "No, Detective. I think I just haven't learned how to hate her properly yet." She closed her notebook. "If she's involved, we'll find her. But I need you to stay alert. If she was desperate enough to send someone like Calloway, she's desperate enough to come herself." Julian nodded, his eyes fixed on the mirror above the dresser, the same one that had revealed the shadow the night before. "Let her come," he said quietly. After she left, he sat down again, staring at the silver locket resting on the desk. The polished surface caught the sunlight, and for a fleeting moment, it almost looked clean, almost beautiful. Then he saw the tiny, dried speck of blood on the edge. Clara's blood. His throat tightened. He picked up his phone and called the hospital. A nurse confirmed that Clara was awake, but still under observation for a mild concussion and a sprained shoulder. "She keeps asking about the babies," the nurse added, a smile evident in her voice. "You must be very lucky to have someone like her." "I am," Julian said. And for the first time in months, he truly meant it. He hung up, grabbed his coat, and headed out. The hospital was a 15-minute drive away, its glass facade gleaming under the morning sun. When he entered Clara's room, she was sitting up in bed, her right arm in a sling, her sandy blonde hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked exhausted, but alive. "You shouldn't be here, sir," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips despite herself. "And you shouldn't be apologizing," Julian replied, pulling a chair up to the bedside. "I didn't stop him," she murmured, her eyes lowering to her lap. "If I'd reacted faster—" "You did enough. You saved my children's lives." She swallowed hard. "He said something strange before he ran. He said, 'Tell her I got what she wanted.'" Julian stiffened. "Tell who?" "I thought he meant me at first, but—" He looked toward the camera when he said it. Julian frowned. The hidden camera. Evelyn knew the location of every visible camera in the house, but not that one, unless someone had told her. He rubbed his temples, a headache beginning to form. "She wanted me to see it," he said under his breath. "She wanted me to watch it happen." Clara's eyes widened. Why would anyone do that? Because that's who she is now, Julian said, his voice low and cold. She doesn't steal for money. She steals to make a point. He stood and walked to the window, staring down at the hospital parking lot below. I spent half a year locking every door, firing everyone I couldn't trust, thinking I was protecting my children. But it was me who brought the danger inside in the first place. Clara studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You can't protect anyone if you don't forgive yourself first." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Julian turned back toward her, meeting her calm, steady gaze. "My father used to say," she continued, "when you fight for too long, you forget what peace looks like. Maybe it's time you remembered." He didn't answer, but the hard look in his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. As he left the hospital room, he felt something unfamiliar, something that almost resembled clarity. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the lake and distant rain. Julian pulled his coat tighter and glanced once at the locket in his pocket. If Evelyn wanted a message, she had certainly delivered one, but this time he would be the one to answer. Julian returned to the mansion just before noon, the sky still overcast from the morning's mist rolling in off the lake. The scent of dew and fresh soil clung to the hedges along the driveway, and for once he noticed it, not just as a detail, but as a sensation. Something Clara had said in the hospital lingered in his head like a bell still ringing. You can't protect anyone if you don't forgive yourself first. He parked the Bentley and sat for a moment, his hands on the wheel, watching the front door. This house used to represent control. Perfect lines, glass walls, security codes, surveillance. Now it felt more like a mausoleum. It had taken one break-in, one shadow caught in a mirror, to remind him that steel and wires don't protect people. People protect people. Inside, the house was quiet. The twins were still down for their late morning nap, cared for by a temporary pediatric nurse the sheriff's department had recommended. Julian nodded to her, exchanged brief pleasantries, and made his way to his study. He stood by the desk, staring at the scratched locket lying next to his laptop. Evelyn's locket. He had locked it away a year ago, after the divorce was finalized, tucked it into a velvet pouch like a memory he wanted to forget but couldn't quite discard. Now it sat there like a signature on a confession. He picked it up and turned it over. On the back, a tiny engraving. E.M. Her initials before she had taken his name. He opened his laptop and tapped into the analog footage Detective Rossi had mentioned. The grainy video from the old service gate camera played back in choppy, delayed loops. But there it was, 6:42 p.m., just over an hour after Clara had bathed the twins and put them down for the night. A man in a gray windbreaker, tall and stocky, moving with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. And as the man turned his head toward the house, Julian caught a clear profile. He knew that face. Mark Calloway. Julian's hands clenched into fists. He had seen the man once before, 3 years ago, during a fundraiser in Manhattan. He had been sitting beside Evelyn at a charity poker event. Back then, Evelyn had introduced him as just an old friend from college. Julian hadn't thought twice about it, but now it was all aligning. Evelyn's emotional withdrawal from their marriage, her sudden insistence on separate personal accounts, her shifting moods, and finally, her disappearance. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a long con, meticulously planned. The buzzing of the intercom on his desk startled him. "Mr. Croft," the nurse's voice crackled. "Olivia's up and she's hungry." He rose instinctively and crossed the house to the nursery. Olivia's eyes were wide, blinking slowly, as if adjusting to the light. Her tiny fingers curled and uncurled as she kicked softly against the crib mattress. She let out a little grumble, then a small protest that threatened to escalate into a full-blown cry. "I've got her," Julian said, nodding to the nurse. He lifted Olivia gently, her small, warm body instantly settling against his chest. She stared up at him, unblinking, then gave a sudden hiccup that made him smile. A real smile, for the first time in what felt like months. "Yeah," he murmured. "I hear you. It's been a rough week." He fed her slowly, rocking on the balls of his feet. Every now and then she would pause to look up at him, as if trying to memorize the face of a man who had, until recently, been a stranger. Maybe he had been. He thought of Clara, the way she had thrown herself over the twins, the bruises on her arms, the way she had remained calm even with blood running down her forehead. The hospital had said she might be discharged the next day. The nurse had told him with a chuckle that Clara asked about the babies more than she talked about her own injuries. Once Olivia had dozed off again, he gently returned her to the crib and stepped out into the hallway. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Detective Rossi. "Found the getaway car. Burned out near Waukegan. ID and phone recovered inside. Suspect has likely fled the city limits. We believe Evelyn is still local. Possible accomplice involved." Julian stared at the message. Still local? That meant she hadn't run. Not yet. He turned the phone over in his hand. His mind raced, not with panic this time, but with cold, hard calculation. She was circling him, watching. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about control, or revenge, or both. And the only way to take that power back was to stop hiding. He texted Rossi back. "What's your next move?" Her reply came within a minute. "Stake out on known contacts. Surveillance request for her old condo downtown has been approved. She's slipping. It's only a matter of time." Julian stared at the screen, then looked toward the guest room. Clara's room. He hadn't touched it since the night she was taken to the hospital. He pushed open the door. The air smelled faintly of lavender and soap. Her shoes were lined up neatly under the bed. A notebook still lay open on the side table. She had drawn something, a quick pencil sketch of the twins side by side, holding hands in their sleep. The sight of it stopped him cold. He sat on the edge of the bed and studied the drawing. There was a line scribbled beneath it. "Safe is a place, not a feeling." His throat tightened. He remembered the first day she had arrived. Soft-spoken. No perfume, no jewelry, no nonsense. She had said only one thing that had lingered in his mind ever since. "I can stay full-time if needed." He had thought she meant the job. Now he wasn't so sure. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a blocked number. He hesitated, then answered, his voice firm. "Croft." Silence. Then a woman's voice, familiar, smooth, but tinged with something sharper, more brittle than he remembered. "You never did change the service gate code." His blood turned to ice. "Evelyn." "Don't hang up," she said, her tone almost conversational. "You should hear what I have to say. For your sake, and for the kids." The line crackled with static. "I told you before," she added. "This was never the life for me. But that doesn't mean I can't still claim what's mine." Julian's hand trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "You already did," he said. "And what you left behind isn't yours anymore." He ended the call and stared out the window, his jaw clenched. She was near, but so was the end of her game. Julian sat motionless. The phone still clutched in his hand long after the call had ended. Evelyn's voice echoed in his head, a ghost stepping back into a house she once owned. "You never did change the service gate code." It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of a dozen threats. She had been watching. Maybe not for days, but for weeks. She knew his routines, his vulnerabilities. She knew when Clara would be alone. And more importantly, she knew that on some level, Julian had never truly let go of the past. He stood, pocketed the phone, and walked down to the security room beneath the east wing, a space he had once mocked Evelyn for insisting upon. "No one needs a bunker in Lake Forest," he had joked. She had smiled then, sipping a glass of Chardonnay by the fireplace, and replied, "No one needs one until they do." Now he wished he had listened more closely. He flicked on the lights. The bank of monitors blinked to life, each feed stuttering before stabilizing. Dozens of angles covered the property: the front gate, the garage, the stairwells, the nursery, the kitchens, and hallway motion sensors. He navigated through the archived footage from the last 48 hours, scouring for anomalies: vehicles parked for too long on the street outside, movement in the shadows, blurred silhouettes at the edge of the frame. There was nothing. Evelyn had learned her tradecraft well. He opened the main access panel and entered a new service gate code, known 9166, Clara's birthday, according to her employment file. Not that she had ever mentioned it or asked for a celebration, but now it felt like a kind of quiet acknowledgement, a tribute to the only person who had bled to protect this house. Once the system beeped in confirmation, he backed out and checked the firewall logs. Someone had wormed their way into the network. It wasn't a brute force attack. This was surgical. Evelyn must have given Mark the digital map, where the backup routers were hidden, which cameras to disable, how to time the signal jammer to avoid triggering the primary alarm. He was still scrolling through the logs when a soft knock sounded behind him. It was the temporary nurse. "Mr. Croft, sorry to interrupt, but there's a call for you from the hospital. It's Miss Jensen." Julian was already halfway up the stairs. He took the call in the sitting room, pacing near the fireplace. "Clara?" Her voice was faint, but steady. "I'm being discharged. They want me to rest, but—" She paused. "I don't want to go home. Not yet." He glanced toward the window. A crow was perched on the garden gate, its head cocked, watching. Always watching. "I don't think you should," he replied. "Not now." There was silence for a breath. "Would it be all right if I stayed in the guest house?" Julian looked toward the empty guest house on the far side of the property. It had once been Evelyn's yoga studio, then had been forgotten after she left. Clara must have noticed it during her walks with the twins in the garden. "Yes," he said without a moment's hesitation. "I'll have it ready for you before you arrive." A beat passed. "Thank you," she whispered. After they hung up, Julian walked to the guest house. The place was dusty but intact. He opened the windows, letting the crisp autumn breeze roll in. Pine needles clung to the porch railing. The yoga mats were still rolled up in the corner. A framed photo of a sunrise that Evelyn had once adored still sat on the mantelpiece above the small fireplace. He picked it up and looked at the gold lettering etched beneath the glass. "Start again." How ironic. By the time Clara arrived that evening, the sky was bruised with shades of purple and orange. Julian opened the gate himself. She stepped out of the rideshare carefully, one arm still in a sling, the other clutching a small overnight bag. She wore no makeup, and her expression was tired, but her eyes were steady. "They didn't have to send a nurse," she said as she stepped onto the walkway. "I insisted," he replied. "I owe you more than a paycheck." She gave a single nod, then glanced toward the main house. "They're okay?" He smiled faintly. "Sleeping." Leo fought his nap time like it was a war. But eventually, I won. Her eyes lit up just slightly. He doesn't give in easily. That's his mother's spirit. Julian didn't correct her. He led her to the guest house, opened the door, and let her step inside first. She looked around quietly, absorbing everything. The soft lighting, the clean linens on the bed, the tray of soup on the counter, still warm. You didn't have to do all this. I didn't have to install hidden cameras either, but here we are. She laughed, a short, tired sound that reminded him just how human she was. Not just the quiet savior from the footage, not just the resilient figure in a hospital bed, but a woman who had endured more than he would probably ever know. As she began to unpack slowly, Nicholas lingered by the door. "I got a call," he said finally. "From Evelyn." Clara turned, her expression sharpening instantly. "Did she threaten you?" "No, not directly. She just reminded me that I hadn't changed the gate code." "She's watching," Clara said softly. "I know. And she's not finished," he nodded. "I don't think this was just about the money in the safe." "It was about control," Clara added. "About leaving fingerprints, a message." Julian looked at her. "What kind of message?" "She wanted you to see what she could still reach. To remind you that even after disappearing, she's still a part of this house." He looked around the guest house, the frame above the fireplace, the windows she had picked out, the flooring she had insisted on. And now Clara stood in it, wounded and wary, but still standing. "I think she made a mistake," Julian said. "Because if she wanted to remind me of what she left behind, she also reminded me of what she gave up." Clara didn't respond, but he saw it in her eyes. Something shifting. Not comfort, not quite trust, but the beginning of something. He nodded once and stepped outside. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. He pulled his coat tighter, and as he walked back to the main house, he realized for the first time that he wasn't afraid of Evelyn anymore. She might have the blueprints to his life, but he had something stronger now. He had someone worth protecting. That night, Julian sat alone in the nursery. The room was bathed in the amber glow of a soft corner lamp. Olivia was fast asleep in her crib, one arm flung dramatically over her stuffed rabbit. Leo, however, had insisted through an orchestra of grunts and gurgles on being held. Now he rested against Julian's chest. A warm, stubborn little heartbeat pressed over a father's reluctant one. It had been hours since Clara had settled into the guest house. She hadn't called or texted, but Julian had seen the light come on in her upstairs window. He had watched from his study as she moved slowly across the room, adjusting the shades, folding a blanket, placing her small bag on a chair. The way she moved, deliberate, quiet, cautious, reminded him of how Evelyn used to move, back before their marriage had grown sharp edges, before the smiles had turned into smirks. Leo stirred and let out a long, weary sigh that seemed far too adult for his tiny body. Julian smiled faintly, shifted him gently into the crib, and covered both twins with the soft knit blanket that Clara had hand-stitched their initials into, a detail he hadn't noticed until tonight. As he left the nursery, he took a final glance over his shoulder. Safe for now. Downstairs, the doorbell rang, the chime echoing through the silent house. Julian froze. It was nearly midnight. He moved to the monitor by the front door, switching to the exterior camera. A delivery driver stood awkwardly at the gate, holding a small white envelope and a clipboard. There was no logo on his shirt, no delivery van in sight, just a rusted-out sedan idling on the road behind him. Julian pressed the intercom button. Delivery for Julian Croft. the man said, his tone uncertain, as if he wasn't sure who he was talking to. Julian hesitated for a long moment, then remotely unlocked the gate. He opened the front door and waited. The driver approached quickly, handed him the envelope without a word, then scurried back to his car without even asking for a signature. Julian stood there for a moment before shutting and locking the door. He tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper. The message was typed, "You should have changed the cameras, too." There was no return address, no signature, but he didn't need one. He walked straight to the security room. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the deep logs from the last 72 hours. Internal access, external access. He searched for timestamps, for anything suspicious. Nothing stood out until he scrolled back further. 8 days ago. Remote access logged through a buried protocol, a relic of the original home system, an old sub-network Evelyn had insisted on keeping during renovations for her personal devices. She hadn't just walked away from the house. She had left herself a digital key. He cursed under his breath, pulled out his phone, and dialed Detective Rossi. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "Croft, she's inside my system. Not just the gate, the cameras. She's been watching." Rossi inhaled sharply. "Are you sure?" "She just sent me a message to prove it." "Keep everything untouched. Don't log her out. We'll get a forensics unit over there first thing in the morning." Julian paused. "What about her?" "We're tracing her calls, cross-referencing known associates. She's moving in tight circles, but we'll close in. Until then, keep that house locked down." He nodded, thanked her, and hung up. Then he walked to the cabinet near the bar. It hadn't been touched in months. He pulled open a drawer and removed a small velvet pouch. Inside was the last spare drive, containing the original architectural floor plans, wiring layouts, and access protocols for the entire estate. He remembered the night he had created it, when Evelyn was already sleeping in the guest room, and Clara had yet to exist in his world. Back when the only thing he had truly feared was being alone. He inserted the drive into the main console and began updating every system, line by line. Gate codes, backup passwords, biometric access points. Every digital trace Evelyn had left behind was being methodically overwritten. He worked for hours. By the time he finished, the house was silent and still. At 4:12 a.m., he stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp, and clean. A light was still on in the guest house. He crossed the yard without thinking, climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch, and knocked once. Clara answered in a robe, her hair pulled back into a low braid, her eyes wary but not surprised. "I didn't wake you, did I?" he asked. She tilted her head. "You've been awake since the sirens, haven't you?" Julian managed a slight smile. "Fair enough." He handed her the envelope. She read the note silently, her expression unreadable. "She's playing with you," Clara said softly. "I know." "You could call her bluff." He looked up at her. "And risk her doubling down?" Clara folded the paper in half. "She already has." He exhaled, the porch creaking under his weight as he leaned against the railing. "I used to think this house was the safest thing I could give them," he said, his voice low. "Security systems, fences, cameras." He looked at her. "And now?" "And now I know that a person is either a shield or they're not." Clara studied him for a moment. "You're trying. Is it that obvious?" She gave a small, tired smile. To someone who's been on both sides of the door, yes. He straightened, nodding once. "I'll let you get some rest." "Thank you, Mr. Croft." He paused at the top of the steps. "It's Julian," he said. "If you want." Her eyes softened. Good night, Julian." He turned and walked back to the main house, the sky just beginning to show the faintest hints of dawn. Behind him, the porch light flicked off, and somewhere out there, Evelyn was watching. But this time, so was he. The next morning, Julian stood in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes one-handed while balancing a whimpering Leo on his hip. Olivia sat in her high chair, pounding a plastic spoon against the tray like a tiny general demanding breakfast. He had barely slept, but strangely, he didn't feel tired. A new kind of energy, born of purpose, coursed through him. Clara had returned to the main house just after sunrise, insisting on taking over for the pediatric nurse, who had packed her things with a relieved smile. "Your house runs like a command center," the nurse had said to Julian, "but she runs it like a home." Clara was quiet that morning, her movements slower than usual as she still favored the arm in the sling. But Nicholas noticed something different in her demeanor. Less guarded, more present. When she sat the twins down on the playmat, they reached for her immediately, their small hands patting her knees. She didn't speak much, but her hands never stopped moving, checking formula temperatures, wiping drool from chins, folding laundry with those perfect military-grade corners. "Want some coffee?" Julian asked, lifting the pot. She glanced up, surprised by the offer. "Sure. 2 sugars, no cream." He poured her a mug and set it on the counter beside a plate of pancakes he had slightly overcooked on one side. "They're a little burnt." "They're food," she said, taking a bite and nodding approvingly. "Best breakfast I've had all week." He leaned against the opposite counter, watching the twins crawl after each other on the soft rug. "They're stronger than I thought." Clara sipped her coffee. "They get it from their mother." He arched an eyebrow. Her lips quirked into a small smile. "I meant their real mother." He didn't argue. Before either of them could say more, Julian's phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Rossi. "Found Evelyn. South Loop. Need you at the station." He looked up at Clara, his expression grim. "They found her." Her grip on the mug tightened. "Are you ready?" He stared down at the screen, then toward the twins. "I think I am." The Lake County Sheriff's Department headquarters was a modern, imposing building of glass and concrete, with security cameras that actually worked. Detective Rossi met him in the main lobby, dressed in a navy blazer and jeans, her ID clipped to her hip. She was spotted outside a co-working space, using a fake name, Rossi explained, as they walked down a long, sterile corridor. "Security recognized her from a bulletin we distributed last week." Julian followed her into a low-lit interview room. Behind a pane of one-way glass, Evelyn sat at a metal table, dressed in a black coat and sunglasses, her hair slicked back. She looked thinner than he remembered, more calculated. "She waived her right to counsel," Rossi said, her voice low. "But she's only willing to talk to you." Julian didn't move, his eyes fixed on the woman who had once shared his bed. Rossi studied him. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I do." She opened the door. Julian stepped inside. Evelyn didn't look up immediately. "It's been a while," she said, stirring the cheap coffee in front of her with a flimsy wooden stick. "Not long enough." She smirked, finally raising her eyes to meet his. "You look tired." "Try raising 2 children and rebuilding a house from scratch." She laughed softly, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Is that what you're calling it now? A house? You used to call it a fortress." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his posture rigid. "You sent a man into my home. He hurt my employee. He terrorized my children." "No," she said, twirling the stirrer between her fingers. "Employee?" You mean that girl you hired to replace me? Julian didn't flinch. She's not a replacement. She's a protector. Evelyn's smile faded. You always did need someone to rescue you, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. First your father, then me, now her. You had everything, he said flatly. A family, a future. And you threw it all away. Her fingers stopped moving. I threw it away, she whispered, her voice dangerously low. Or did you push me out? Julian leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. You walked out, Evelyn. You emptied the accounts. You abandoned your own children. She slammed the stirrer down on the table. I was drowning, and you were too busy counting your startup stock price to even notice. Silence hung heavy in the room. I made a mistake, she said, her voice softer now, but no less manipulative. But I didn't send Mark to hurt anyone. I told him to grab the documents from the safe and leave. He could have killed Clara. She blinked, looking down at her coffee as if it held the answers. She got in the way. No, Julian said, his voice cold and clear. She stood in the way. You think you left your family? But what you really left was your humanity. Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her mouth remained a hard, unforgiving line. Did you come here to make peace, or to hurt me? He stood up, pushing his chair back. Neither. I came to end it. He walked out of the room before she could answer. Back at the house, the air smelled of baby lotion and cinnamon toast. Julian found Clara on the back porch. Olivia was in her lap, and Leo was crawling nearby in the afternoon sunlight. The garden behind them buzzed with the sound of bees, and the soft rustle of leaves swayed in the late morning wind. She's in custody, he said quietly. Clara didn't look up from stroking Olivia's hair. Will she be charged? She already confessed to aiding the break-in. They'll get her on conspiracy, fraud, and maybe more. Will the twins ever know? Julian watched Leo struggle to pick up a blade of grass, then giggle when it slipped from his tiny fingers. They'll know the truth, he said, but not the pain. That stops with us. Clara nodded, brushing Olivia's curls with gentle fingers. You did it, Julian. He looked at her, then at the twins, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. We did it. And for the first time since everything began, he sat down beside her, not to escape from the world, but to stay in it. The days that followed moved with a gentler rhythm, like a song shifting from a frantic march to something closer to a lullaby. Nicholas now woke before sunrise, not out of obligation, but out of instinct. He would check the windows, reset the cameras out of habit, and then sit in the nursery with a warm bottle while the twins stirred softly beneath a mobile of hand-sewn clouds. Clara had been officially reinstated as the twins' full-time caregiver, though in truth she had never really stopped. Her sling was gone, but she still moved carefully, favoring the arm that had taken the brunt of Mark's assault. Julian had offered her a full medical leave, even hired a live-in assistant to help, but she had simply said, I'm not made for sitting still. Instead, Clara settled back into the rhythm of the house like a puzzle piece that had always been missing. She handled the babies with an innate grace, managed the rotating schedule of cleaning staff and night nurses, and had started baking banana bread. Real banana bread, not from a box. Julian had teased her about it once, and she had shrugged and said, It's what my father made every time he thought the world needed to slow down. Now, the comforting scent of it often drifted through the hallways. The children were growing. Leo had learned to roll over with a fierce determination, and Olivia had discovered that she could squeal loud enough to make the neighbor's dog bark. Julian found himself laughing more, sometimes with Clara, sometimes with the twins, and sometimes to his own surprise, just by himself. But there was one thing he hadn't done. He hadn't visited Evelyn. Detective Rossi had called to update him. Evelyn had been transferred to a holding facility while they processed the charges. Mark Calloway had cut a plea deal, offering testimony against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. Evelyn's role in the break-in and her digital sabotage would likely result in significant prison time. Maybe years, maybe more. And still, he hadn't gone to see her, not out of fear, but because for the first time in months, he didn't feel the need to. One evening, a week after Evelyn's arrest, Julian found himself in the garden after dark. The air was cool, and a low fog rolled in from the east. He stood beneath the old cedar tree, his hands in his pockets, listening to the faint sounds of a lullaby playing through the baby monitor clipped to his belt. Behind him, he heard footsteps on the grass. Clara. She didn't say anything right away, just stood beside him, looking out at the shadows stretching across the lawn. "They're both asleep," she said finally. Julian nodded. "I miss them when they're asleep. Is that normal?" Clara gave a soft chuckle. "It is when you realize they're the only thing in your life you've done right." He turned to her, his face lit gently by the porch light behind them. "You've done more than right, Clara. You've been everything." She shifted slightly, unsure of how to respond. So he went on. "I used to believe that people were either born to protect or to be protected. But I don't think that's true anymore. I think we all get broken. And the real strength," he paused, "the real strength is in getting back up anyway." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, the cracked silver locket that Evelyn had left behind. He held it between his thumb and forefinger. "This used to mean something to me. Now, it's just proof that symbols can lie." He held it out to her. She didn't take it. Instead, she gently closed his hand around it. "That was her story," she said softly. "It doesn't have to be yours." He looked at her, his gaze intense. In the silence that stretched between them, something shifted. It wasn't romantic, not yet. But it was real and steady. A kind of partnership that had been forged in pain, protected by fire, and proven through every bruised night and every dawn that came after. "Do you ever miss your father?" he asked quietly. "Every day," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Especially on quiet nights like this. Was he strict?" "He was fair," she said. "He taught me how to fight, not to hurt people, but so that no one could take from me what wasn't theirs to take." Julian nodded slowly. "He'd be proud of you." Clara looked away, blinking hard against the sudden rush of emotion. "That's the first time I've heard someone say that in years." "You'll hear it again," he said. "From them." He nodded toward the nursery window, where two small shadows moved slightly behind the drawn curtain. They already know, even if they don't have the words for it yet. They stood like that for a while longer, the fog thickening around them, the air growing colder. Finally, Clara turned toward the guest house. "You should get inside. It's colder than you think." Julian hesitated. Then, "Stay for tea." She paused, looking at him, a question in her eyes. "Are you asking me as my employer?" "No," he said. "As a father who doesn't want to drink alone anymore." Clara smiled, a warm, slow smile that seemed to chase the fog away. "All right, but only if I get to pick the music this time." Julian held the door open for her. "Just don't make me suffer through any more of that smooth jazz." She laughed, the sound bright and clear in the quiet night. Inside, the kettle whistled. Two people sat at the kitchen table, not in love, not yet, but learning how to trust. And outside, beyond the fences and the gates, the night held its breath. Rain fell softly the next morning, drizzling against the window panes in a steady, calming rhythm. The kind of rain that Chicago wore like a second skin. Gentle, unbothered, persistent. Julian stood in the foyer, adjusting the collar of his coat, his eyes lingering on the framed family photo that still hung beside the door. It was an old one. Olivia and Leo were just a month old. Evelyn sat rigidly beside him, her smile practiced, her hand barely touching his shoulder. He hadn't realized at the time how far apart they already were. He took the frame off the wall and set it face down on a nearby table. Today wasn't about the past. It was about what came next. He stepped outside, umbrella in hand, just as Clara came up the path from the guest house. She wore a navy raincoat and jeans, her sandy blonde hair tied back in a neat twist. A small umbrella swayed in her other hand as she balanced Leo on her hip. Olivia toddled beside her, her tiny hand tucked securely into Clara's coat pocket. The twins had started taking small, wobbly steps over the last week. Olivia led the charge, of course, ever curious, ever bold, while Leo observed, cautious before trying anything himself. Julian smiled as they approached. "Is this your way of telling me we don't need the baby gates anymore?" Clara chuckled. "No, this is my way of telling you we still need padding. Lots of it." He leaned down and scooped Olivia up, kissing her damp forehead. "Morning, troublemaker."